Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the high desert plateau of the Navajo Nation, a sovereign territory spanning portions of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, where highways stretch for hundreds of miles beneath skies so vast they feel like another kind of wilderness. Out here, mile markers serve as the only reference points between isolated communities. And when something goes wrong, those numbers become coordinates for encounters no dispatch log was designed to contain. The stories you're about to hear are drawn from verified highway patrol reports, emergency service recordings, and first-hand witness accounts documented between 2009 and 2017. Each one centers on a specific mile marker along routes that see more darkness than headlights, where cell service fades and the distance between help and isolation can be measured in hours. These roads connect communities separated by distances that can feel infinite at night, when the only lights visible are your own headlights reflecting off mile marker signs that count upward into emptiness. The Navajo Nation is the largest Native American reservation in the United States, covering an area roughly the size of West Virginia. The highways that cross this territory were built to serve scattered populations across terrain that ranges from red rock canyons to windswept mesas to high desert plains where nothing grows taller than sage. Many of these routes see fewer than 20 vehicles per hour during daylight, and after dark, that number drops to nearly zero. When dispatch receives a call from these highways, response times are calculated not in minutes, but in the distance officers must travel 30 miles, 40 miles, sometimes more to reach someone waiting alone. These are not legends passed down through generations. These are recent events, cataloged and verified, told by the people who answered the calls or made them. Each account has been cross-referenced with official records, and where witnesses gave permission, their statements have been preserved exactly as they were recorded. Now, let us begin with our first call. It was the third week of September, 2012, and autumn had begun to settle across the high desert. Officer Raymond Begay had been with the Navajo Nation Police Department for 11 years, assigned to the Northern District where Route 491 cuts through high desert between Shiprock and the Colorado border. The highway was once numbered Route 666, renamed in 2003 after decades of petitions citing accidents, vandalism, and what locals simply called bad energy. Raymond had heard the stories his entire life. His grandfather refused to drive the route after dark. But in all his years of patrol, he had logged more speeding citations than unexplained incidents. He drove the route 5 nights a week, knew every turn and rise, and had come to regard it as just another stretch of asphalt connecting one place to another. That night, dispatch reached him at 9:37 p.m. A stranded motorist had called from mile marker 147, approximately 12 miles south of the Colorado state line. The caller, a woman named Patricia Yellowhorse, reported a flat tire and no spare. She had been traveling alone from Cortez back to Farmington. Her voice on the recorded call was steady, businesslike. She gave her location, described her vehicle as a white 2007 Honda Accord, and said she would wait with her hazards on. The dispatcher estimated Raymond's arrival time at 26 minutes. Raymond acknowledged the call and turned north from his position near Sheep Springs. The temperature had dropped to 41 degrees. A wind from the west carried the dry smell of sage and sand. He passed 2 vehicles in 15 minutes, both heading south, a pickup truck with Wyoming plates and a sedan that he recognized as belonging to a family from Shiprock. The highway was otherwise empty, the kind of empty that makes headlights feel like the only light in the world. The landscape along this stretch is open and exposed, with scattered mesas rising in the distance and arroyos cutting through pale earth. During the day, you can see for miles. At night, the darkness is so complete that the horizon disappears entirely. Raymond kept his speed steady, watching the mile markers count upward in his headlights. Mile marker 140, mile marker 143, mile marker 145. He reached mile marker 147 at 10:03 p.m. His dash camera captured the moment his headlights swept the shoulder. There was no white Honda. There was no vehicle at all. He slowed, scanning both sides of the road. The pavement was clear. The shoulders showed no tire tracks, no debris, no evidence that anyone had stopped. He pulled onto the shoulder and engaged his spotlight, sweeping it across the landscape. Nothing but empty ground and low brush moving in the wind. Raymond radioed dispatch. The dispatcher confirmed the call had come in 31 minutes earlier from a cell phone registered to Patricia Yellowhorse. The phone's GPS had pinged from this location. Raymond requested a call back to the number. Dispatch attempted contact. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Raymond sat idling at the marker, driver's side window down, listening. The wind moved through low brush. Far to the east, a coyote called. A semi passed heading north, its running lights fading into the distance, and then the road was empty again. Raymond stepped out of his vehicle and walked the shoulder with his flashlight, checking for anything that might explain the call. The beam swept across gravel and sand. He found no glass, no fluid stains, no footprints in the soft dirt beyond the pavement. The ground was undisturbed. He walked 50 feet in each direction, then crossed to the opposite shoulder and repeated the search. Nothing. He returned to his unit and ran the license plate Patricia had mentioned in her call. The registration came back valid, matching her name and address in Farmington. At 10:12 p.m., dispatch radioed again. They had reached Patricia Yellowhorse at her home number. She answered immediately. She told them she had not left her house that evening. She had not called for assistance. When asked if anyone else had access to her phone, she confirmed it was in her purse on her kitchen counter and had been there since she returned from work at 6 p.m. She checked while the dispatcher waited. The phone was there. The call log showed no outgoing calls after 4:30 that afternoon. Raymond remained at mile marker 147 for another 20 minutes. He photographed the location from multiple angles. He documented the empty shoulder, the clear pavement, the absence of any evidence. He noted in his report that visibility was excellent and that he had arrived well within the estimated time frame. A vehicle could not have driven away without him seeing it, and the road runs straight for 3 miles in both directions from that marker. He would have seen headlights or taillights. He saw nothing. He filed his report at the end of his shift. The incident was classified as a false call, origin undetermined. The dispatcher who had taken the original call noted that the woman's voice had sounded genuine, not distressed, but matter-of-fact. Exactly the way someone would sound when reporting a flat tire. The phone number was legitimate. The GPS coordinates were accurate. But Patricia Yellowhorse had been home, and her phone had been with her. 3 weeks later, on October 9th, another officer responded to mile marker 147 for a reported stranded vehicle. A caller had given the same location, describing a mechanical issue. The officer arrived to find an empty road. The caller could not be reached. The phone number was disconnected. In January of 2013, it happened again. A man called reporting that his vehicle had run out of gas at mile marker 147. When the responding officer arrived, there was no vehicle and no caller. The number belonged to someone in Albuquerque who stated they had not made the call and had not been on Route 491 in over a year. Dispatch began tracking the pattern. Between September 2012 and June 2017, mile marker 147 generated 19 calls. Each time, officers arrived to find nothing. Each time, the callers either could not be reached or denied making the call. The phone numbers were real, the GPS coordinates accurate, but the vehicles and people were never there. No explanation was ever provided. Mile marker 147 remains active on Route 491, and dispatch continues to log calls from that location approximately 4 times a year. Officers respond each time, knowing what they will find. The road empty, the night silent, the mile marker standing alone beneath stars that offer no answers. The call came through at 2:41 a.m. on November 6, 2014, to the dispatch center in Window Rock. James Tsozi was driving westbound on Route 264 between Window Rock and Ganado when his engine temperature spiked and the vehicle lost power. He coasted to the shoulder near mile marker 89 and dialed the non-emergency line for roadside assistance. The dispatcher logged his location and estimated a 40-minute response time. James said he would wait in the vehicle with the doors locked. He had driven this route hundreds of times, delivering supplies for the school district, and knew the stretch well. Flat, open country with scattered juniper and long sight lines in every direction. There were no houses visible from the road, no businesses, just the highway cutting through land that looked the same for miles. The dispatcher asked if James had enough fuel to run the heater. James confirmed he did. The temperature outside was 34 degrees. The dispatcher told him an officer was en route and to call back if anything changed. James acknowledged and ended the call. He settled into the driver's seat, turned the heater on low, and waited. The highway was empty. No vehicles passed in either direction. The silence was total except for the faint whistle of wind through a gap in the door seal. At 2:58 a.m., a highway patrol unit driven by Officer Clarice Benally reached mile marker 89. Her dash camera recorded the scene. A dark blue 2010 Ford F-150 sat on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in steady rhythm. The cab appeared empty. Clarice activated her spotlight and swept it across the vehicle. No movement. She radioed her arrival and approached on foot, flashlight in her left hand, right hand near her duty belt. She knocked on the driver's side window. No response. She knocked again, louder, and called out, "Sir, this is Navajo Nation Police. Can you hear me?" Still nothing. She circled the vehicle, checking each door and window. All 4 doors were locked. The windows were up. The driver's seat was pushed back as if someone had been sitting there recently. But James Tsozi was not inside. His phone was on the dashboard, screen dark. His wallet and keys were on the passenger seat. A thermos sat in the cup holder. The engine was cold to the touch, though James had called dispatch only 17 minutes earlier. Clarice radioed for backup and returned to her unit to review the timeline. Dispatch confirmed James had called at 2:41 a.m. from this location. There had been no further communication. Clarice scanned the surrounding area with her spotlight. The high desert stretched empty in all directions. The nearest lights were from Ganado, 8 miles west. There was no place to walk to, no buildings, no homes, no other vehicles. The nearest structure was a shuttered trading post 4 miles west, abandoned for a decade. She stepped out again and called James's name. Her voice carried in the cold air and faded into nothing. She walked a wide circle around both vehicles, looking for tracks. The ground near the pavement was hard-packed caliche, difficult to leave prints in, but the soft sand beyond the shoulder should have shown footprints if someone had walked away. She found none. The only marks in the sand were her own boot prints. A second unit arrived at 3:22 a.m., driven by Officer Dale Tsozi, no relation to James. The 2 officers conducted a coordinated foot search within a half-mile radius, using flashlights and calling out at intervals. The beam of their lights swept across empty land. Juniper trees stood like dark figures in the distance. An arroyo cut through the terrain 200 yards south, and they searched its edges carefully, knowing it would be easy to fall into in the dark. They found nothing. No clothing, no signs of injury, no indication anyone had been in the area. At dawn, a canine unit was brought in from Chinle. The German shepherd named Max was an experienced tracker, credited with locating missing persons on 6 previous occasions. The handler, Officer Yellowhorse, walked Max to the driver's side door of James's truck and let the dog catch the scent from a jacket James kept in the cab. Max circled the vehicle twice, nose to the ground, then tracked a scent from the driver's door approximately 60 feet into the brush, moving in a straight line away from the road. Then the dog sat down and refused to continue. Officer Yellowhorse encouraged Max to keep searching. The dog stood, circled the same spot 3 times, sat down again, and whined. The handler later reported that Max appeared confused, repeatedly returning to the same point, as if the trail ended there abruptly. After 15 minutes, Max lost interest entirely and had to be led back to the vehicle. This was unusual behavior for a dog that typically remained focused until finding the subject or exhausting all possibilities. A ground search involving 12 officers and volunteers continued throughout the day. They covered a 3-mile radius around mile marker 89, checking every arroyo, every cluster of rocks, every stand of trees. They found no trace of James Tsozi. His family was notified. His photograph was distributed to law enforcement across the region. The FBI was contacted, as disappearances on tribal land fall under federal jurisdiction. Agents arrived and conducted interviews, reviewed the evidence, and found nothing to explain where James had gone. The truck was towed to an impound lot and processed. Forensic examination revealed no signs of struggle, no blood, no foreign fingerprints. James's phone showed no activity after the call to dispatch. His wallet contained his driver's license, $43 in cash, and several credit cards. None of the cards showed activity after November 5th. His bank account showed no withdrawals. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist at 2:41 a.m. on November 6th. James Tsozi was found 8 days later on November 14th, walking along a frontage road near Ganado, 11 miles south of mile marker 89. A passing motorist saw him and stopped. James was dehydrated and disoriented, his clothes dirty and torn. He had lost 12 pounds. The motorist called 911. Paramedics transported James to Sage Memorial Hospital in Ganado, where he was treated for dehydration, exposure, and minor lacerations on his hands and feet. When questioned by investigators, James had no memory of leaving his vehicle. He remembered waiting for assistance, feeling tired, and leaning his seat back to rest. The next thing he remembered was walking in daylight with no sense of time or direction. He did not know it was daytime or nighttime, could not say how long he had been walking, and had no recollection of 8 days passing. Medical examination found no head trauma, no signs of intoxication, no drugs in his system, and no explanation for the gap in his memory. Psychologists evaluated James for dissociative fugue and other conditions that might cause memory loss. The results were inconclusive. James was a healthy 42-year-old man with no high call of mental illness, no substance abuse, and no reason to fabricate the call. He returned to work 3 weeks later, but could not drive Route 264 without feeling profound unease. He requested a route change, and his supervisor accommodated the request without question. The incident report remains open. The FBI file is classified as unresolved. James Tsozi no longer drives Route 264 at night and declines to discuss the incident except to say that he believes he was somewhere during those 8 days. But wherever it was not anywhere he recognizes as part of the world he knows. In the summer of 2010, Route 160 between Kayenta and the Utah border saw a series of calls that followed an unusual pattern. The first came on June 19th at 11:51 p.m. A motorist named Derek Largo reported seeing a woman standing at mile marker 12 wearing a white dress and waving for help. He slowed but did not stop, unsettled by the isolated location and late hour. He called from the next town, 15 minutes west. By the time a patrol unit arrived, the area was empty. The officers searched the shoulder and the surrounding terrain and found no one. The second call came 11 days later, on June 30th. A truck driver radioed that he had nearly struck a pedestrian at mile marker 12, a woman in white, standing in the roadway. He swerved into the opposite lane, narrowly avoiding her, and brought his rig to a stop 200 feet past the marker. He looked back. She was gone. The driver, a man named Carl Shepard from Flagstaff, had been driving professionally for 19 years and had never filed a report like this before. His CB recording captured his report, time-stamped at 12:03 a.m. His voice was shaken but clear. He described the woman as standing perfectly still, facing his headlights, wearing what looked like a long white dress or gown. The third call came on July 8th. A couple traveling to Monument Valley pulled over at mile marker 12 to check a map. The passenger, Lorraine Begay, saw a figure in the rearview mirror standing approximately 30 feet behind the vehicle. She described a woman in a pale dress, motionless, facing the car. Lorraine said nothing at first, assuming it was a trick of the light. Then the figure moved closer. Lorraine told her husband to look. When he turned to look directly through the rear window, the figure was no longer visible. They left immediately and reported the sighting the following morning at the Kayenta police station. Highway Patrol increased monitoring of the area. Officers checked mile marker 12 during overnight shifts throughout July and August. They found no one. No abandoned vehicles, no campsites, no evidence of anyone living or traveling on foot in the area. The terrain was open scrubland with scattered rock formations, offering little cover and no water source within miles. It was not a place anyone would choose to walk, especially at night. On July 23rd, an officer named Tom Begay sat in his patrol vehicle near mile marker 12 from midnight until 3 a.m. He saw nothing unusual. No pedestrians, no vehicles stopping, no movement except the wind through the brush. He filed a report stating the area was clear and quiet. 2 nights later, another sighting was reported. A family traveling east from Utah saw a woman in white standing at the mile marker at 12:37 a.m. They did not stop. The father called from Kayenta 30 minutes later. He described the figure as standing at the exact location of the marker post, one arm raised as if waving or signaling. His wife and teenage son both confirmed seeing the same thing. On August 23rd, at 12:37 a.m., dispatch received a call from a cell phone registered to Vanessa Todachin, a teacher from Kayenta returning home from a workshop in Blanding, Utah. The caller was breathless, speaking rapidly. She said she had stopped at mile marker 12 to let her dog out and saw a woman walking toward her from the roadway. Vanessa returned to her car, locked the doors, and attempted to drive away. Her engine would not start. She turned the key repeatedly. The engine turned over, but would not catch. She said the woman was now standing beside the driver's window, looking in. The call lasted 41 seconds before disconnecting. A patrol unit driven by Officer Elias Benali arrived 9 minutes later. Vanessa's car was there, a silver 2009 Honda CR-V. Driver's door open, keys in the ignition, headlights on. Vanessa was sitting on the ground near the rear bumper, her arms wrapped around her small dog, a terrier mix that was shaking but silent. Vanessa herself was silent and unresponsive, staring at the ground. Officer Benali approached slowly, identified himself, and asked if she was hurt. Vanessa did not respond. Paramedics arrived at 12:53 a.m. They assessed Vanessa and found no physical injuries. Her vital signs were stable, but her affect was flat, as if she were not fully present. They transported her to Kayenta Health Center. She was treated for shock and released the next day with instructions to follow up with her physician. In her statement, given 2 days later, Vanessa described the events clearly. She had stopped to let her dog out because he had been restless in the back seat. She stepped out with him, walked a few feet from the car, and that's when she saw the woman. The figure was approximately 40 feet away, walking toward her at a steady pace. Vanessa could not see the woman's face clearly. The headlights created a glare, but the shape was distinct. A woman in a long, pale dress, moving without hurry. Vanessa returned to her car, put the dog in the back seat, and tried to start the engine. It would not start. She tried again and again. She heard footsteps on the gravel shoulder coming closer. She looked up and the woman was standing beside her window, inches from the glass. Vanessa said the woman's face was visible now, pale and expressionless, eyes dark and unblinking. Vanessa looked away, fumbling with her phone to call for help. When she looked back, the figure was gone and the door was open. She did not remember opening the door. She did not remember getting out of the car. The next thing she remembered was sitting on the ground with her dog, and then the officer was there. Vanessa checked her call log after giving her statement. The call to dispatch had lasted 41 seconds. Officer Benally's dash camera showed he had arrived 9 minutes after the call was placed. Vanessa had no memory of what happened during those 9 minutes or the additional 15 minutes before the officer found her sitting on the ground. No further calls were logged from mile marker 12 for the remainder of 2010. The following summer, in June of 2011, the pattern resumed. Between June and August, 4 more sightings were reported, all between midnight and 1 a.m. Each described the same figure, a woman in white standing at or near the marker, sometimes motionless, sometimes walking toward the witness. Each witness left quickly, shaken but unharmed. Navajo Nation police documented the reports but issued no public statements. An internal memo circulated among officers working the Northern District, noting the pattern and advising caution when responding to calls from that location. One veteran officer added a handwritten note to the memo. Do not approach figures on foot after dark. Maintain visual contact from vehicle only. Mile marker 12 remains one of the most frequently called-in locations on Route 160. Though the road itself sees little traffic after dark, officers continue to respond and witnesses continue to report what they see. No one has been harmed, but no one who has seen the figure forgets it. It was early March of 2015, and the night still carried a sharp cold across the high desert of northwestern New Mexico. Clayton Nez worked for a medical courier service, transporting lab samples and supplies between clinics in Shiprock and the Navajo Nation headquarters in Window Rock. The route along Highway 59 was one he drove twice a week, usually departing after his day shift ended, traveling through the night to meet morning delivery schedules. He had made the drive so many times he could navigate it half asleep, recognizing every curve and landmark by feel. He knew where the road dipped into washes, where the pavement was rough, where deer sometimes crossed in the headlights. On the night of March 4th, Clayton left Shiprock at 10:15 p.m. with a cooler of specimens in the back seat and a thermos of coffee in the cup holder. The highway was dark and empty, as it usually was. He passed through San Osti, the small community offering the only lights for miles, and continued south into open country. The radio played low a classic rock station out of Farmington, and the heater hummed against the cold. The drive was routine, meditative, the kind of work that allowed his mind to wander. At 11:32 p.m., Clayton's headlights caught the reflective paint of mile marker 73. He had passed it 100 times without thought. This time, something made him glance at the shoulder. A vehicle sat parked just beyond the marker, a sedan, light-colored, possibly tan or beige. Its hazard lights were not on. No one stood beside it. The car simply sat there, angled slightly toward the road, as if it had pulled over in a hurry. Clayton slowed, uncertain. His job required him to stay on schedule, but the isolation of the route and the unusual sight of another car made him hesitate. It was unusual to see any vehicle parked on this stretch at night. The nearest town was San Osti, 12 miles back, and the nearest gas station was 20 miles ahead. People did not stop here unless they had no choice. He pulled onto the shoulder 20 feet past the vehicle and left his engine running. He stepped out, flashlight in hand, and approached the sedan. It was a mid-90s Chevrolet Lumina, faded tan, covered in a thin layer of dust. The windows were dark. He tapped on the driver's side glass with the back of his flashlight. No response. He called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" His voice sounded small in the emptiness. He tried the door. Locked. He circled the car, shining his light through each window. The interior was empty. No personal belongings, no trash, no sign anyone had been inside recently. The back seat was bare. The floor mats looked old and stained. The tires looked flat, not punctured, but deflated, as if the car had been sitting for days. Clayton returned to his vehicle and called the non-emergency line. He reported the abandoned car, gave the mile marker, and was told someone would check it in the morning. The dispatcher thanked him and ended the call. Clayton sat in his vehicle, engine idling, looking at the sedan in his rearview mirror. Something about it felt wrong, not threatening, just wrong, out of place. He told himself he was overthinking it and reached for the gear shift. As he did, he heard a sound, faint, rhythmic, knocking. He turned off his engine and rolled down the window. The sound was coming from the direction of the sedan. Knock, knock, knock. Steady, deliberate, like knuckles on glass. He stepped out again, listening. The sound stopped. He walked back to the car, slower this time, and aimed his flashlight through the rear window. A handprint was pressed against the inside of the glass. Small, distinct, the kind a child might leave. The fingers were spread wide, the palm flat against the glass. Clayton stepped back. He had checked the vehicle less than 2 minutes earlier. The interior had been empty. He raised the flashlight, illuminating the back seat, still empty. But the handprint remained, clear and unmistakable. He felt his pulse quicken. He reached for the rear door handle, then stopped. Every instinct told him not to open that door. Every instinct told him to return to his vehicle and leave. The knocking resumed. This time it came from the trunk. Louder now, more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. The rhythm never varied. Clayton walked to the rear of the car, his breath visible in the cold air. The knocking was directly beneath him, coming from inside the trunk. He placed his hand on the trunk lid. The knocking stopped immediately. He tried the latch. Locked. He stepped back and the knocking resumed. Clayton returned to his vehicle, started the engine, and left. He did not look back. He drove the remaining 43 miles to Window Rock without stopping, delivered his samples, and filed a verbal report with the night supervisor. He mentioned the abandoned car, but not the knocking or the handprint. The supervisor noted the location and said the police would check it out. The next morning, a highway patrol officer checked mile marker 73. There was no vehicle on the shoulder. No tire marks, no debris, No indication anything had been parked there. The officer photographed the location and filed a report. Clayton's call was logged, but could not be substantiated. The dispatcher who had taken his call confirmed the timestamp and the details he had provided. But without physical evidence, the incident was classified as a possible mistaken location. Clayton insisted he had the right location. He drove the route again 3 days later during daylight, stopped at mile marker 73, and confirmed it was the spot. There was nothing there. No sign a vehicle had ever been parked on the shoulder. He took photographs of the mile marker and the surrounding area and submitted them with a written statement. The report was amended to include his follow-up, but remained unresolved. Clayton continued driving the route, but avoided stopping at mile marker 73. On 2 subsequent trips, both at night, he saw the same tan sedan in his peripheral vision as he passed the marker. Each time, he kept his eyes forward and did not slow down. When he looked in the rearview mirror, the shoulder was empty. He mentioned this to other drivers at the courier service. 2 of them said they had seen an abandoned car on Route 59 at various times over the years, always in the same general area, always at night, always gone by morning. No vehicle matching the description has been located. No missing persons reports correspond with the time frame. The knocking has not been explained. The high plateau country of northern Arizona, where Route 12 runs between Navajo Mountain and the Utah border, is some of the most remote terrain in the continental United States. On the night of October 9th, 2013, a family traveling south from a ceremony near Navajo Mountain experienced mechanical trouble near mile marker 104. The father, Eugene Benally, pulled onto the narrow shoulder and attempted to diagnose the problem. Steam rose from beneath the hood. The engine had overheated. Eugene told his wife, Rita, and their 2 daughters to remain in the vehicle while he let it cool. There was no cell service. The nearest town was Kayenta, 40 minutes away. The night was cold and clear, the stars dense overhead. At approximately 9:20 p.m., Eugene walked to the top of a rise a short distance from the road to see if he could spot lights from any nearby homes or ranches. The landscape was dark in all directions. No lights, no structures, just the vast emptiness of the plateau stretching to distant mesas that were barely visible against the night sky. As he turned to walk back, he heard a vehicle approaching from the south. He jogged down to the roadside, hoping to flag it down for assistance. The vehicle was a truck, moving fast. Eugene stepped to the edge of the pavement and waved his arms. The truck slowed as it neared, then stopped approximately 50 feet away. The headlights were bright, making it difficult to see the driver. Eugene walked toward the truck, hand raised in greeting. As he came within 10 feet of the passenger window, the truck reversed suddenly, tires spitting gravel, and sped away north. Eugene stood in the road, confused and frustrated. He returned to his vehicle. Rita asked if he had been able to get help. Eugene told her what happened. She suggested they wait another hour and try starting the engine again. The youngest daughter, 6-year-old Maya, asked why the truck had driven away. Eugene said he didn't know. Maya said she had been watching from the back window and that the truck had no driver. Eugene told her she must have been mistaken and the headlights were bright, making it hard to see. Maya insisted. She said she had looked carefully because she wanted to see who was inside. The cab was empty. Her older sister, 12-year-old Sophia, confirmed she had seen the same thing. Both children were adamant. Eugene dismissed it as a trick of light and shadow, the way headlights and darkness can create illusions. 20 minutes later, another vehicle approached from the south, a sedan this time. Eugene flagged it down. The driver, an elderly Navajo man traveling alone, stopped and offered assistance. He introduced himself as Thomas Yazzie and said he could give Eugene a ride to Kayenta to call for a tow. Eugene accepted. As they drove, Eugene mentioned the truck that had stopped and reversed. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then asked what mile marker they had been near. Eugene said 104. Thomas nodded slowly and said he knew the area. He asked if Eugene had tried to approach the truck. Eugene confirmed he had walked toward it. Thomas said that was unwise. When Eugene asked why, Thomas glanced at him and then back at the road. "There are things on this highway that are not what they appear to be," he said, "especially near that marker. My father told me never to stop there after dark. His father told him the same thing." Eugene asked what Thomas meant. Thomas said only that he knew the area and that Eugene should not return to that spot after dark if he could avoid it. He said nothing more about it, and Eugene did not press. A tow truck retrieved the Benally family's vehicle at 11:45 p.m. The radiator had cracked, easily repaired. The tow driver, a younger man from Kayenta, loaded the vehicle onto his flatbed. Eugene asked if he had heard of anything unusual near mile marker 104. The driver said no, but he didn't like that stretch of road and avoided it when possible. He did not elaborate. Eugene did not ask further. In the years since, Eugene has driven Route 12 many times during daylight, but has not stopped near mile marker 104 after sunset. His daughters, now adults, remember the night clearly and maintain they saw what they saw. Sophia, now 26 and living in Flagstaff, said in a recent interview that she remembers looking directly at the truck's cab and seeing the steering wheel, the dashboard, and the empty driver's seat illuminated by the headlights of their own vehicle. There was no one inside. Maya, now 20, says she will never forget the sight of the truck reversing away. Its headlights bright and the cab dark and hollow. Eugene had the radiator repaired and the vehicle ran without issue for another 5 years before he sold it. He has never forgotten the old man's warning, and he has never returned to mile marker 104 after dark. Route 191 runs north-south through the eastern edge of the Navajo Nation, a long corridor connecting isolated communities through terrain that shifts from red rock canyons to high desert plains. In the early hours of April 7, 2016, a semi-truck driver named Marshall Tso was traveling south on 191, approaching the small community of Mexican Water. The time was 3:55 a.m. Marshall had been driving for 6 hours, hauling produce from Colorado to Phoenix, and was ahead of schedule. The road was empty, the way it usually was at that hour. He kept his speed steady and his mind occupied with an audiobook playing through his speakers, a thriller about a detective tracking a serial killer. The narrator's voice was calm and measured, keeping Marshall alert. As he passed mile marker 52, his CB radio crackled to life. A voice came through, male, calm, and deliberate. "Drivers southbound on 191, you need to stop." Marshall picked up the handset and responded, asking who was calling. No answer. The radio went silent. He checked his mirrors. No vehicles behind him. No lights anywhere. The highway stretched empty in both directions. He replaced the handset and continued driving. A moment later, the radio crackled again. The same voice. "Drivers southbound on 191, you need to pull over. Now." The tone was insistent but not aggressive. Marshall felt a chill move through him. He slowed and brought the rig onto the shoulder near mile marker 51. He sat with the engine idling, waiting. The radio remained silent. He scanned the darkness outside. Nothing moved. No vehicles, no lights. Just the empty highway and the dark shapes of mesas against the stars. He picked up the handset. "This is southbound 191. Who am I talking to?" Silence. He waited 5 minutes, checking his mirrors, scanning the road ahead and behind. Nothing. He reached for the gear shift to pull back onto the highway. The voice returned. "Don't." Just that one word, spoken firmly. Marshall released the gear shift. He felt the temperature in the cab drop, though the heater was running. A cold that seemed to come from nowhere. He asked again who was on the radio. This time, the voice responded. "You're going to want to stay where you are for the next 10 minutes. Marshall asked why. No response. He sat in the silence, engine rumbling, hands on the wheel. He later described the feeling as oppressive, as if the air itself had weight pressing down on him. His instinct was to drive, to move, to get away from the spot. But something in the tone of the voice kept him there. It was not threatening. It was a warning. The difference was clear to him, though he could not explain why. At 4:06 a.m., Marshall saw headlights approaching from the north. A pickup truck moving fast. It blew past him, doing at least 85 miles per hour, weaving slightly between lanes. Marshall watched it disappear around a curve a half-mile ahead. Seconds later, he saw a flash of light, not bright, just a brief flare, and then darkness. He waited. The radio remained silent. After 2 more minutes, Marshall pulled back onto the highway and drove south. A quarter-mile beyond the curve, he saw the wreckage. The pickup had gone off the road and rolled multiple times, coming to rest in a shallow ravine 30 feet from the pavement. Debris was scattered across the shoulder. The truck was on its roof, the cab crushed. Marshall stopped and called 911. Emergency responders arrived within 30 minutes. The driver of the pickup, a man in his 20s, was declared dead at the scene. Investigators determined he had fallen asleep at the wheel. Skid marks indicated he had drifted onto the shoulder, overcorrected, and lost control. The truck had rolled at least 4 times before coming to rest. Marshall gave his statement to the highway patrol officer. He mentioned the CB radio warning. The officer, a man named Harrison Benally, asked if Marshall recognized the voice. Marshall said no. He described it as calm, articulate, with no accent he could identify. Officer Benally noted the information, but offered no comment. Marshall asked if there were any other trucks in the area that might have called in the warning. The officer checked with dispatch. No other commercial vehicles had been logged on that stretch of highway between 3 and 5 a.m. Marshall's truck was the only one. Officer Benally asked Marshall to estimate how fast the pickup had been traveling when it passed him. Marshall said at least 85, possibly 90. The officer nodded and wrote in his notebook. He asked if Marshall had been monitoring the CB before the voice came through. Marshall said he had, out of habit, but the channel had been silent all night. The officer asked which channel. Marshall said 19, the standard highway channel. The officer made another note and thanked Marshall for stopping to report the accident. Marshall never heard the voice again. He drove Route 191 regularly for another 2 years before retiring, and each time he passed mile marker 52, he remembered the calm insistence of the warning. He later calculated the timing. If he had continued driving instead of pulling over, he would have been in the exact spot where the pickup went off the road at the exact moment it happened. The pickup would have collided with his trailer as it crossed the center line. Both vehicles would have been involved in the crash. In an interview conducted in 2018, Marshall said he believes the voice saved his life. He does not know who it belonged to or how they knew what was about to happen. He only knows that he is alive because he listened. No explanation for the radio contact was ever provided. Dispatch confirmed that no transmissions were logged on Channel 19 at the time Marshall reported hearing the voice. No other drivers in the area reported hearing anything unusual. The voice remains unidentified, It was early winter on the Navajo Nation, the kind of cold that settles deep into the earth and seems to stretch endlessly across the high desert plains, when the final account in this sequence of encounters began. In late January of 2017, the northern route between Page, Arizona and Chinle was almost empty after midnight. The two-lane blacktop of Route 98 ran east-west across the reservation, bordered on both sides by vast open land, sagebrush flats broken only by sandstone outcroppings and distant mesas. It was a stretch of highway many locals avoided after dark, not merely because of the isolation, but because of old stories older than the road itself. Stories of things seen on moonless nights, of figures walking where no person should be, of whispers in the wind crossing the desert at impossible speeds. But most travelers dismiss such things as superstition, or shadows playing tricks against headlights. Sandra Yazzie, a 42-year-old home health nurse, was not the type to be shaken by such tales. She had driven Route 98 for years, sometimes at night, sometimes at dawn, making the long trip from Page back to her home in many farms. She was reliable, calm under pressure, the kind of person trusted to care for patients in remote locations. Nothing in her years of experience suggested she should fear the lonely highway or anything wandering along it. At 1:31 a.m. on January 28, 2017, dispatch received a short call from Sandra's cell phone. Her voice, recorded in the incident log, was steady and professional. She stated she was at mile marker 28 on Route 98 and had nearly struck someone standing in the road. She explained she had stopped her vehicle to check if the person was injured, but when she stepped out and looked around, the figure was gone. She requested an officer to check the area, adding she would wait with her car until help arrived. Nothing in her tone indicated fear. She seemed slightly unsettled, yes, but not alarmed. She ended the call politely, the way she ended dozens of professional calls each week. Officer Ben Toledo was on patrol in Kayenta when the call came through. At 34, he had been with the Navajo Nation Police long enough to know that late-night highway calls could be unpredictable. Drunk drivers, vehicle breakdowns, wild animals darting into the road, even livestock wandering loose. But a pedestrian standing in the middle of Route 98 at nearly 1:30 in the morning was unusual, especially in winter, especially so far from any homes or turnoffs. Still, he treated it as a routine check. He notified dispatch that he was en route and began the 40-minute drive north. The sky that night was moonless, the kind of deep, star-heavy darkness that swallows the edges of the road. The desert stretched out on either side, vast and silent. Ben drove with caution, scanning for anything unusual. Nothing appeared. No foot traffic, no stalled cars, no sign of movement. At 2:14 a.m., he reached mile marker 28. Sandra's vehicle was parked neatly on the shoulder, a white 2012 Toyota Camry. The headlights remained on, illuminating the stretch of pavement ahead with two bright cones of light. The engine was running, sending faint plumes of exhaust curling upward and dissolving into the cold air. Ben parked behind her, activated his spotlight, and noted immediately that the car was motionless. No shifting silhouette, no movement inside. He approached cautiously, shining his flashlight through the driver's window. Sandra sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel at the 10-2 position, her back straight, her posture rigid, as if frozen mid-thought. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, unblinking. She did not turn toward Ben's light. She did not react in any way. Ben tapped on the window politely at first. No response. He tapped again, louder. "Miss Yazzie, can you hear me?" Nothing. He tried the door handle. It was unlocked. He opened it slowly, prepared for anything. Medical emergency, shock, disorientation. "Ma'am?" Are you all right?" Sandra took a slow, deliberate breath, as though surfacing from deep underwater. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, her eyes blinked, and she turned to him with a confused expression. "I'm sorry," she said after a pause. I don't know." Ben asked her to describe what happened. She repeated what she'd told dispatch. She was driving westbound when a figure suddenly appeared in the middle of the road. She swerved hard to avoid hitting them. Heart pounding, she pulled over, got out, and looked around. The road was empty. No person, no footprints, no sign of anyone. She had called dispatch. Then, nothing. She said she remembered sitting back in her car, but didn't remember anything after that. Ben checked the clock. It was now 2:23 a.m. Sandra had called dispatch at 1:31 a.m. She had been sitting in her car, unaware of the passage of time, for 43 minutes. Ben found this strange, but not unheard of. Missing time could result from shock or fear. However, Sandra's demeanor was not consistent with panic. She seemed more puzzled than frightened. He told her to stay in her car while he checked the area. He walked the road with his flashlight, scanning both shoulders, checking for footprints, tire tracks, signs of impact. The asphalt was clean. The dirt shoulders were undisturbed. There were no marks indicating a person had been standing on the road or that they'd fled. The air was cold, but still. Even the wind seemed muted, as if refusing to disturb the desert's midnight silence. Returning to Sandra, he found her looking exhausted, shaken in a way she couldn't articulate. She said she felt something while sitting there, something she could not see or hear, but sensed. A presence, she said, an attention, something aware of her. She struggled to describe it further. Ben offered to call EMS. Sandra declined immediately. She said she just wanted to go home. He suggested he follow her to the next town to make sure she made it safely. She agreed. They both pulled onto the road at 2:41 a.m. Ben glanced at his dash camera screen out of habit, making sure the device had been recording since his arrival. Everything appeared normal. Sandra's vehicle drove steadily ahead of him as they made their way east toward the next settlement. The rest of the night was uneventful, but the footage was not. Later that morning, while reviewing the dash camera recording at the station, Ben noticed something that made his blood run cold. It occurred in the final few seconds before he pulled up behind Sandra's vehicle, just 6 frames of video, less than 2 seconds in total. The dash camera showed Sandra's Camry parked alone on the shoulder. Then, in the next frame, a figure appeared. A tall, thin figure standing beside the driver's window, facing the car. The image was pixelated and blurred, typical of low-light digital compression, but the outline was unmistakable. A human-like shape, head slightly bowed, unmoving. It stood no more than 3 feet from the door. In the following frame, it remained. Same position, same shape, same height, same proximity, 6 frames in total. Then, in the next frame, gone. Vanished as though it had never been there. No movement, no walking away, no fading out of view. It simply ceased to exist. The next frame showed only the empty shoulder bathed in darkness, and then Ben's headlights sweeping into view as he approached. Ben replayed the footage again, and again, and again. He froze each frame, enlarged it, enhanced it as best he could. The shape was consistent across all visible frames, not distorted differently in each one, not shifting as a glitch typically would. It held the same posture, same angle, same lean toward the window. He saved the footage, attached it to his incident report, and included a note describing what he had observed. He did not sleep well that night. 2 months later, Sandra contacted the station. She said she had been thinking a lot about what happened and wanted to know if the department had found anything unusual. Her tone was polite but tense, as though she already suspected the answer. Ben chose his words carefully. He said they had not found any physical evidence at the scene, which was technically true. He did not tell her about the figure in the footage. He couldn't bring himself to. Something about the image, its stillness, its proximity, felt too heavy to place on her. Sandra seemed relieved on the surface, but her voice carried a tremor of disbelief. Before she ended the call, she mentioned she no longer drove Route 98 after dark. When she had no choice, rare though that was, she did not stop for any reason between Page and Chinley. She said she didn't care if she saw a person in the road again. She would keep driving. She would not pull over. Ben understood. The footage remains archived in the department's digital records, cataloged under Incident 2017-0211. Multiple officers and supervisors have reviewed it. Opinions vary. Some believe it shows a person, a real individual who vanished into the desert before Ben arrived. Others believe it is an artifact of the dash camera, a glitch created by compression, low lighting, or rapid temperature changes. No one can agree. No figure was ever identified. No footprints were found. No reports of missing persons in the area matched the timeline. No other calls came in that night. And yet, the figure stands there, frozen in 6 frames of video, watching Sandra's vehicle, staring through her window, or waiting. Ben eventually stopped watching the footage. He said it made him feel watched in return, as though studying it too long opened some connection he didn't want. Sandra continues her work as a home health nurse. She remains compassionate, dedicated, and dependable. But she has altered her routes, she has changed her habits, and she has never returned to mile marker 28. When asked why, she always gives the same answer. Because something was there that night, something I shouldn't have stopped for, and I don't think it was done with me. In the end, the case remains open. Unresolved, the footage remains unexplained, and Route 98 continues to run, empty and silent after dark, across a stretch of land where stories older than the road still travel with the wind, stories of figures appearing and disappearing at will, of beings that stand just at the edge of sight, seen only in the briefest moments before they vanish. What Sandra saw that night remains unknown. But whatever it was, it stood at her window. And something about its presence still lingers in the 6 silent frames that remain. The American Southwest is a landscape defined by distance and light. And when the light fades, what remains is distance alone. Out here, the roads are long and the night is absolute. Travelers pass through corridors of darkness, punctuated only by their own headlights and the faint glow of mile markers counting off the emptiness. It is country that demands respect, not for what it shows, but for what it conceals. The stories we have shared tonight are not folklore. They are documented accounts from people who encountered something they could not reconcile with the familiar shape of the world. These are recent events, cataloged and verified, preserved in police reports and dispatch recordings and witness statements that carry the weight of lived experience. The Navajo Nation is a place where the land itself seems to remember things that people have forgotten, or perhaps have never known. The highways that cross this territory are recent additions, built within living memory. But the land they cross is ancient. It has been home to people for thousands of years, and in that time, stories have accumulated like sediment, layer upon layer, until what is known and what is believed become difficult to separate. The accounts we have presented tonight exist in that uncertain space between the documented and the inexplicable. Whether these events have explanations rooted in perception, environment, or something beyond our current understanding is a question each listener must answer for themselves. What cannot be dismissed is the consistency of the reports, the credibility of the witnesses, and the calm professionalism of the officers who responded to calls that had no resolution. These are not people prone to exaggeration. They are truck drivers, nurses, couriers, families traveling home. They are officers who have worked these roads for years and have seen enough to know the difference between the explainable and the inexplicable. In a place where help can be an hour away and the stars outnumber the lights, it is worth remembering that not all mysteries are meant to be solved immediately. Some must simply be recorded, respected, and carried forward by those who were there. The mile markers remain. The highways remain. And somewhere out there, in the darkness between towns, between lights, between the known and the unknown, something continues to make its presence felt in ways that defy easy explanation. The officers who patrol these roads understand something that outsiders do not. They understand that the land is vast and indifferent, that the darkness is absolute, and that the distance between mile markers can feel infinite when you are alone and something has gone wrong. They respond to every call, knowing that some will have no explanation, knowing that some reports will be filed and remain open indefinitely, knowing that the witnesses will remember what happened long after the paperwork is complete. If you or someone you know has a true call to share from these highways or any other remote place, leave it in the comments below. Every account adds to the record, and every voice matters in understanding what lies beyond the familiar. These stories are part of a larger pattern, one that stretches across the American landscape, connecting isolated incidents through the simple fact of their strangeness, their consistency, and their resistance to conventional explanation. The roads will still be there tomorrow. The mile markers will still count off the distance. And somewhere,